Chapter 6. Fear takes hold. Grun's remaining men slowed, the cocky grins vanishing from their faces. They had heard the scream. One of them muttered a curse, his weapon raised, eyes scanning the dark spaces between the towering crates. "Stay sharp!" Grunt snarled, but even his voice had a hint of unease. Something was hunting them now. It was no longer a simple chase for their quarry. They were being pursued, and whatever it was fast. A clatter of metal from above made one pirate whip his head up, only to see a fleeting shadow dart across the top of a cargo container. His heart pounded in his chest. "Captain! What is that?" he stammered. Grund growled, but did not answer. He had no idea what hunted them, but he could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes, the looming dread. This was no ordinary foe. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Joy. Krux moved through the shadows, reveling in the slow unraveling of his prey. The pirates, once full of crude confidence, were now teetering on the edge of panic. Each footstep they took, each hurried breath was soaked in desperation. It was intoxicating. He could sense their growing terror, and it filled him with a familiar sense of purpose. These men, these pathetic scavengers, were nothing more than prey to him. He spotted one of them, a wiry man with a scar across his face, darting between the containers. The pirate was breathing heavily, eyes darting, looking everywhere but where he should have. Krux let the man glimpse him for a split second, a towering figure in midnight blue armor disappearing around a corner. The pirate froze, gripping his weapon tightly, his fear surging like blood from a wound. The Night Lord circled back, moving silently behind the pirate. He could feel the man's pulse quicken, hear the rasp of his breath, taste the fear hanging thick in the air. With a slow, deliberate motion, Krux dragged his claws along the metal wall beside him, sending a screech of metal on metal through the cargo bay. The pirate spun, firing his lasgun wildly into the darkness, shouting incoherent curses. Krux watched in amusement as the man emptied his magazine into shadows, and then, as the pirate stood there panting, Krux stepped out of the dark. The man barely had time to scream before Crux's talons slashed through his chest, spilling steaming blood across the cold steel floor. Chapter 8. Trapped in Terror. Adya could hear the lasgun fire echoing through the cargo bay, and her heart raced. The sounds were wild, erratic, not the focused shots of a hunting party, but the frantic bursts of men firing in panic. Whatever was happening, it was taking them out one by one. And while part of her felt relief, knowing that the pirates were being hunted, another part of her felt an overwhelming dread. What kind of creature could terrify men like Grund and his crew? Her hands shook as she clenched her fists, her only defense in the growing darkness. She had no idea where to go, no clear plan, just the primal urge to survive. As she crept through the maze, her breath shallow, trying to remain hidden, each sound, each shifting shadow made her flinch. Then, ahead of her, she saw a figure. It was Grund, staggering back from somewhere deeper in the bay, his lasgun spent. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment all she could think of was hiding again, staying out of sight, but something in her snapped. She remembered the cruel laughter, the gleam in their eyes as they'd chased her like an animal, and now the tables had turned. Adya clenched her teeth, clenching her fists tighter, her knuckles turning white. She wouldn't run anymore. Not from him. Chapter 9. Prey unraveling. Grun's breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled through the labyrinth of crates. His crew was gone, picked off one by that thing. He hadn't seen it clearly, just glimpses of dark armor, talons flashing in the gloom. But the screams of his men had told him everything he needed to know. This was no ordinary hunter. This was something far worse. His lasgun was empty, its magazine spent in a wild frenzy of shooting at shadows. His men had died like dogs, and now he was alone, completely alone. He snarled, trying to keep some semblance of control, but fear gnawed at him. The vast cargo bay felt like a tomb. "Show yourself!" he roared into the darkness, voice cracking. "Come on, face me!" No answer came. Only the oppressive silence of the outpost, disturbed by the occasional creak of metal or distant clatter. His own breath sounded unnaturally loud in his ears. Grund swore under his breath and kept moving, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the creature to materialize behind him at any moment. Suddenly his foot caught on something and he fell hard to the floor. Pain shot up his arm as he landed. He looked down. It was the body of one of his men, torn open by brutal talons, blood pooling beneath him. Grund scrambled back, bile rising in his throat. He was going to die here. He could feel it. Chapter 10. A Game of Shadows. Krux watched from the shadows, unseen by Grund as he stumbled through the maze. The pirate leader was unraveling just like the others had. His bravado was gone, replaced by a primal fear that Krux could almost taste. It was delicious. The Night Lord had always enjoyed this part the most. Not the kill itself, but the anticipation of it, the way his prey's mind broke down under the weight of their terror. He had hunted hundreds, thousands in his long life, and the thrill never faded. These men, like so many others before them, had thought they were predators, but they were wrong. They were prey, and Krux was their end. He could have killed Grund at any moment. The pirate was vulnerable, exhausted, his weapon useless, but Krux held back. There was something more here, a different kind of justice to be served. He had felt the fear of the girl, the one Grund and his men had been hunting. He understood what they had planned for her. Crux's twisted sense of justice stirred within him. He would not give Grund the mercy of a quick death. No, someone else deserved to have that moment. With a low growl, Krux stepped out of the shadows, watching as Grund's eyes widened in terror. The pirate scrambled back, trying to raise his empty weapon, but Krux moved too quickly, slashing through his side. Blood sprayed the ground and Grund collapsed, clutching the wound, his face contorted in agony. Krux loomed over him, tilting his head as if pondering his next move. Then with a growl, he turned away. The kill wasn't his to make. Chapter 11. Justice served. Adya found Grund slumped against the base of a crate, bleeding and wheezing. His lasgun lay discarded beside him, the weapon as useless as he was now. She felt a rush of anger. A deep, seething rage she hadn't known was inside her. This was the man who had hunted her, who had laughed while she ran for her life. Now he was broken, helpless. She picked up the lasgun, her hands trembling as she weighed it in her grip. The magazine was empty, she knew that, but it didn't matter. Grund saw her approach, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He tried to speak, to plead, but no words came. Adya's breathing was ragged as she raised the butt of the gun. For a moment she hesitated, looking down at the man who had once terrified her. But only for a moment. With a scream of raw fury, she brought the weapon down on his head. The crack of bone echoed through the bay, but she didn't stop. Again and again she struck, venting every ounce of fear and rage she had bottled up. Krux stood nearby, watching with cold detachment, his black eyes gleaming through his helm. To him this was justice. Not the cold, impersonal judgment of law, but the brutal personal justice that only true fear could bring. When it was over, Adya stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood splattered across her clothes. Grund was still, his face a shattered ruin. She dropped the lasgun, letting it clatter to the floor. Krux said nothing. He didn't need to. This was what he had wanted. Not just to kill, but to make her face her own terror, to confront the darkness that lived within her as well. And now his hunt was over.